We're going to have a Hillsdale College lecture to help out with this discourse. But what I want all of us to do is, as you listen, see how it applies to the jurisdiction of your life. You know, share down in the comment section, where you realize these things could apply to certain aspects, transits, or expressions in your natal chart. Also, remember to schedule for a natal birth chart reading with me personally. I really prefer to work with every single one of you personally, behind the scenes. I want to have a personal effect upon every one of you in a positive way. The videos are not enough. I want to be involved with every last one of you out there to make whatever impact that God has given me the capacity to do, so that whenever we do go over this content, it's that much more impactful and that much more revolutionary. Understand? So as you listen and follow along, the picture I'm trying to paint is how the anatomy of the crab representing Cancer, it perfectly illustrates and expresses the illusion of duality between matriarchy and patriarchy, which actually is a singularity. Once we see it through wisdom and once we see it through love, it is a singularity, okay? And again, that's what it means to see through Gemini. It's not to perceive duality, but to realize the singularity through the revelation of wisdom and love. I am a Gemini sun conjunct Mars. I'm not going to say it's easy for me to do that, but it's my destiny to be able to perceive that way. And as I do have my chances to see that way, it's the joy of my heart to come here and share it whenever I do. Understand? Thank you for your support. Please hit the like button, share, with those who you think could benefit from it. Subscribe, and you got to hit the notification button. I am on the list of, shadow ban, okay? I'm shadow banned out here. Niggas don't want me to get on or to be heard, and those are the people behind the scenes. Y'all know how to go with the politics, you know what I'm saying? So you got to have the notifications on if you really want to hear or notice when a new video comes out, all right? Also, www.the-infamous-astrologist. Go there. I'm constantly uploading new reads, new essays, new information, gradually, consistently, I'm filling it up like a garden. You want to go there and check out the second page of my website, the second page, okay? The second page is titled, What Does Ifa Bukola Offer? Okay, when you click there, you will get a list of all of the astrological transit essays that I've been sending out, and it's more legible on there so that you can read it without, squinting and hurting your eyes, all right? Also, remember, the Spanish Inquisition, the Declaration of, the Doctrine of Discovery, okay? You want to go read about that, because a lot that I'm going to be building on is going to be on top of that understanding. So we want to have that clarified. If you want more insights into astrology, numerology at a basic level, you could go to my website, and read a little bit about that as well. Okay. Also go there. Remember to schedule for your reading. Don't hesitate. If you have children, don't forget them too. All right. If you have a husband or a wife or, significant other, you want to better understand them and how to relate, same thing, okay? I can help you with that through astrology, all right? I'm standing on the same status as my ancestors, okay? The great Moors, understand that. I am an Asiatic, Moabite, Hebrew Moor. I claim that. I stand on that. I express it. You know what I mean? That's my status. And I'm in a jurisdiction of exactly what that means. I'm sharing astrology, teaching astrology, living astrology, just like my forefathers, the navigating Moors. You know what I mean? I am well alive. I am not lost at sea. Understand that. All right, let's listen.
In order to form a more perfect union,
When in the course of human events,
Welcome to this Hillsdale College online course called Constitution 101. By Constitution, we of course mean the greatest and longest living of all the constitutions in history, the Constitution of the United States. We study that here because we're mindful of the fact, always have been at Hillsdale, that we are citizens and we need our freedom in order to live well and do our work, especially the work of a college, which radically depends upon freedom of every kind. We teach the Constitution to every student here at the college, and now we're going to help you learn something about it. The other people who are teaching in this are members of our politics faculty. I'm a member of that faculty myself. And among them all, they may have the most knowledge of the meaning of the Constitution and the significance of the changes that have gone on around it. And so it should be a privilege for you to watch this, and I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you read and continue learning about this for as long as you live, and teach others too. So much, I'll explain, depends on that. There are a lot of details in this course, details of how exactly things work and why they work, details of different understandings than the one that prevails here about those things. And so that will involve us in some complications. And it'll be helpful, I think, if we can keep the kind of general points in mind. And I'm going to name some of those today in my lecture. My first question I'll ask myself and you is, what kind of thing are the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution? Turns out the answer to that is very enriching.
The Declaration of Independence, Congress, July 4th, 1776. You heard? And I read, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitled them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impelled them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to demolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed, would dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than do the right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is the duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
They're different documents. There's an argument that they're opposed. There's a powerful argument in the historical scholarship that the Declaration was meant to be a radical document and the Constitution was meant to be conservative. And those people argue that the Declaration is about the rights of us all, and the Constitution is really about protecting the privileged. Well, we think that's nonsense around here, and even on its face, it's nonsense. For one reason, at the exact time, the Declaration of Independence is from 1776, and the Constitution is from 1787, so they're close together. But never mind, there were all kinds of state constitutions written at the same time as the Declaration of Independence. Some of them signed by people who also signed the Declaration of Independence, and they're all like the Constitution of the United States in their structure, which I'm going to talk about some. That's important.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governor to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the repository of the public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such disillusions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, encampled of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of the salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has obtained with others to subject us to the jurisdiction foreign to the Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, given his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mocking trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury.
So another thing about it is that strikes me as particularly silly, I've written a book about this, is if you read the Declaration of Independence, you will find that it comes in three parts. And in the first part, it states some universal principles, very beautiful. And in the second part, it contains a bill of particulars in 17 paragraphs about bad stuff the King of England did, which bad stuff justifies the making of America, throwing off the old government and adopting a new one. And those things are remarkably like the Constitution of the United States. What did the king do wrong? Well, he interfered with the legislature, which is a violation of the first step in all government, the making of laws, but also a violation of separation of powers, which is crucial to how the Constitution of the United States worked. So separation of powers is important. And then he interfered with the people's ability to elect legislators. In other words, representation, a key feature of the Constitution of the United States. And then he interfered with the judges. He would ship people, arrest them for crimes and ship them off to England where they couldn't be tried by a jury of their peers, nor before judges who were independent of the executive branch, which more or less the king was. So you see, they're writing the Constitution right there. If you have a government that does these things, then you are justified to rebel against that government and to kill anybody who resists you. So it implies the Constitution.
For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English law in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example of fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the form of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by the legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow those usurpations, which would inevitably corrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress, assembled appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions due in the name and by the authority of the colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts of which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. The foregoing declaration was, by order of Congress, engrossed and signed by the following members. That is, all of the representatives of New Hampshire, Delaware, Maryland, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Virginia, Connecticut, so on and so forth. You heard? So, in a nutshell, don't just think it is as United States in their Declaration of Independence. I'm reading this so that we can see the parallel in your Declaration of Independence. That is in spirit and in the flesh. In the flesh, it has to do with what is your list of grievances over your identity, over your natural and inalienable rights that have been stepped on, limited, ignored, unanswered. Where are the instruments of codependency, oppression, places where you stand to be exploited, used, trampled over, places where your rights are violated, where your needs are entirely ignored, and where an institution or even a person will go out their way to make sure that you have a hard time in establishing independence, self-sufficiency, self-determination, or personal empowerment. I'm reading this to you because that same energy has returned to where we now have to use that against the Capricorn Pluto theory of the past, and also against the South Node Libra theory of the past of codependent entanglements, attachments, cords, covenants, things of that nature, in order to clarify the identity so that we could get to the core of the matriarchal need. And from the matriarchal needs, we erect and establish the patriarchal.
Now, what kind of thing that they are different, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they serve different functions. They also sound different in a very interesting way. The Declaration of Independence is really beautiful. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands that have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station, to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. Isn't that a grand expression, the laws of nature and of nature's God? It's written like that. Also, it's not time-bound. When in the course of human events, that means any time in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people. That means any people, anywhere, anytime. The claim is what's going to follow in this document is right at all times. And so one way to think about the difference between the Declaration and the Constitution is it's a document about ultimate purposes, what they call in classic philosophy final causes. Final causes are the things that we seek above all others, the things we would die for. And so the Declaration of Independence states those, and of course those words echo around the world still today, even when they're distorted. You're going to learn something about that in this course. Well, the Constitution is not quite like that. the Constitution is it provides a form of government. And when you read it, I regard it as beautiful and think I understand why it's beautiful. It has to do with its structure, which Madison says is the most important thing about it. But, on any given passage, right, it's full of details. Like there's a list in Article 1, Section 8, things the Congress can do. Well, post offices and post roads is among them. It's hard to write a beautiful sentence about that. No, this is a document about how the government is going to work, even how it's going to look. It looks like a thing that operates in three branches. If there's interviews going on in front of the White House, which there are every day on the nightly news, there's a picture of the White House in the background because that's where the president works and that's where executive things are done. And if there's something big in the Congress, then there's cameras looking up at the Capitol Dome because that's where the Congress operates and where the legislation is made. And the same for the Supreme Court building. In operation, the government looks like the Constitution. And sure enough, the first three articles in the Constitution, the first one sets up the legislative branch, beginning with the words, all legislative power herein granted. And one thing you're going to learn in this course is that we don't make our laws through the Congress anymore. That's why there can be so many of them. And that's why it's impossible to hold to account those who make them, except very indirectly. Indeed, it's even hard to find out who makes them.
The patriarchal order that solidifies the matriarchal and patriarchal as one, finding unity, wisdom, and love expressed through Gemini-Uranus transit, okay, which is why we're having that transit. So even if you have to go over it again, these settlers were able to clarify where their grievances were, where the realization of their natural and inalienable rights were limited, denied, tested, or frustrated. And they were able to also muster the self-determination, confidence, boldness to demand, not ask, but put on notice the claim of their status and jurisdiction and how it's going to be from now on. So is that what you're doing in your life? If not, why haven't you? Why aren't you? When will you get started? How can you start today with initiating this expression over your life? Understand?
I think there are 150 lawmaking agencies in the federal government now. So each of those clauses establish 1, 2, 3, the way the government of the United States looks. And so if you think about it, you couldn't have any serious activity that did not have a final cause. A whole bunch of people cooperating, sometimes at risk to their lives, suffering and trouble and sacrifice. That started right at the beginning, because the first thing that happened after the Declaration of Independence was actually it already happened a bit before. We're having a war with England, the greatest power on earth. And to undertake that, you need a big reason. You need some ultimate reason. And anytime people think of their deaths, they always think of what they lived their lives for. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. But then on the other hand, if you're actually going to have a great government, then there's going to have to be ways for it to operate. Because think what it has to achieve. It has to grant power. The doctrine of the Declaration of Independence is that all legitimate power stems from those who are governed, no other source. But then somehow you've got to get some way to get legitimacy into the things that the government does and have that operate on a routine basis. So if you're going to have a legitimate government, you're going to have a form, a recognized way by which it operates. And so the Constitution provides that. One, you could say, is the final cause, and the other is the formal cause. Now I'm going to back up a step and ask a question that's prevalent today, and that is, why should you have any government at all? What do you need it for? And then we were just over in England as we're making this course, and we were celebrating the completion of the official biography of Winston Churchill, and there was a couple of young English guys who were working and helping us get around, and they were delightful people, and I got into long talks with them, and they just made the point, because, they're having the big debate about whether they separate from the European Union over there or not, and the young, as a rule, don't favor the separation. And they said, well, we're not English. We're European. And I said, what if you don't like something the European Union does? Oh, there's a lot we don't like. We want to see it reformed. And I said, good. What means do you have to achieve that reform? Because it's kind of difficult, isn't it? There's 29 countries, I think, aren't they? They don't all speak the same language. How would you have a conversation with a wide body of fellow citizens to establish a thing like major reforms to the government? And that's a point, isn't it? Because in the Constitution, in the Federalist Papers, which are assigned to read along with this course, and I urge you to read them and reread them because they're a great achievement in political thought, one of the greatest American such achievements. And in the 51st Federalist, Madison is explaining why you have to build a constitution that has precautions in it. It has to grant power. You have to have that. But also it has to constrain power. You have to have that. And the way he puts the point is, what is government but the profoundest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither internal nor external controls on the government would be needed. See what that means? He's locating us in the hierarchy of nature. Down at the bottom are the beast, or the rocks, and up at the top are angels and God. And if angels were being governed, although there's a record in the Bible that their behavior is not perfect, still it's true that as a common run, it's probably a lot better than ours. And they're imagined as disembodied intellects, and so they don't have all the needs and pressures we have. And the beast, they just always obey instinct. Whereas we're moral beings, which means we're called to do right, and we don't always. And that is actually the reason why we need laws. But Madison just makes the common sense points. The people who make the laws are people too. How do we know they won't make them in their own interest? Well, you need a constitution, and it needs to be in control of the governed. And so the reason nations, and that word nation, it comes from the Latin word natura, which means nature. And that means that the making of laws is written in human nature, and it actually proceeds, Aristotle says, from our ability to talk. Because that's the pregnant thing about us. That's the big thing about us. And so this need for government is fundamental. And on the other hand, we need to be able to control it. And
there are 5 points that I'm able to, name right off, of which the Declaration of Independence highlights that it shows transferable awareness, transferable skills, if you say, to where it applies to you. The Aries placement, the Aries expression, the first house, okay? That Neptune-Saturn conjunction at Aries and what it's going to take to clarify that in the direct motion of Saturn. It's the same as your Declaration of Independence. Understand? So, the assertion of rights, for example, justification for independence, establishment of a new government, unification of the colonies, international recognition. Okay, so as for assertion of rights, Just as the Declaration emphasizes the unalienable rights of individuals, the concept of self-determination asserts that each person has a right to define their own identity and pursue their own goals, right? This reflects a belief in personal autonomy and the importance of individual rights in shaping, of your destiny. As for the justification for independence, the grievances listed against King George III, it highlighted the importance of accountability. Remember, coming out of coming out of Scorpio, that is Juno direct out of Scorpio, accountability pairs with moral commitment, okay? So the importance of accountability and a right to challenge authority, all right, when it infringes upon your individual freedoms. You see that? So we're headed in that direction of the expression of freedom. This parallels the idea that individuals must advocate for their own rights and challenge systems that oppress or limit their identity and self-expression. A system can be taking place in the workplace. A system can be taking place at your home, your community, okay? This can take place anywhere where there's an order that's oppressing your natural rights. Understand? Establishment of a new government. The notion that governments derive their power for the consent of the governed aligns with the belief that individuals should have a say, in the infrastructure that governs over their lives. It reflects the idea that self-determination involves not only personal choice, but also participation in, the collective decision that, that respects all the individuals that's involved. Okay. That advocacy goes with cancer. Okay. The moral commitment. You have a moral commitment, to that. And that is part of establishing a new government, self-governance. Understand? Okay. But it's informed by matriarchy. Understand? The call for unity among, unification of the colonies, right? And in this, okay, the parallel is the call for unity among colonies. It mirrors the way that individuals often seek community and solidarity, right? In asserting our identities. Just like the colonies came together to fight for their collective rights, individuals, you, me, we might find strength in community as we navigate our own journey of self-discovery and affirmation. Again, Cancer Jupiter is expanding that practice. It's expanding that practice the proper way. So the fifth thing I mentioned, international recognition. The desire for international support and the struggle of independence reflects the broader human aspiration for recognition and validation, right? As our own identity. Just as the colony sought acknowledgement for the status or their sovereignty, individuals often, we seek recognition. Remember, the status, like I always talk about, status, leads to proper status equals proper jurisdiction, and there are unique identities and experiences, in society. Okay, so claiming the proper status, okay, among others internationally, which can also include the ninth house rather than the 12th house, putting everybody on notice that this is who you are. This is what it is. Understand? So comment down below, go ahead and comment down below how you relate. How do you relate to the Declaration of Independence in your life? You know what I'm saying? Comment down below. Let me know how you relate to that. You heard?
And nations, therefore, are conceived as natural things where people can understand each other. They share a common final cause, as in the Declaration of Independence, which tells us what our nation is for. And then they can cooperate with each other to appoint and manage a government that responds to their will. So it's actually true then, isn't it, that in this age where we're eschewing nationalism for internationalism, the Declaration of Independence talks about that. And mark the point, I've already made it. The Declaration of Independence begins universally. It says that everybody has rights. Every human being, the same in every age, no matter where. And then it says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In other words, these universal rights that we have, they call for government to protect those rights, and they call for a kind of government that will be responsive to us. It's a remarkable thing, I think. It's hard to quarrel with the assertion, which I make all the time, that the greatest of the modern countries is the United States of America. Well, its story is tremendous, right? Because it begins with a new world. Nobody knew where it was. Nobody knew what it was. Until about 1806, I think it was. Nobody really knew how big it was. Nobody had gone across the New World and all the way back until about then, Lewis and Clark. So something happened on this new land. And what was it? They picked up a civilization. It's like in the Western movies, you know, they're often a contest between somebody who's got a law book and somebody who's got a gun. And in the towns where the Westerns take place, there's no capacity at all to produce either a law book or a gun. But they know about them because they've come from a well-developed civilization and brought it out to the frontier. That's what the whole Western movies are just recreations of American history. Because the civilization mostly of Europe, with its understanding of God and its understanding of right and its learning and its understanding of nature, that comes over here, and those people brought all that in their minds and hearts. What they didn't bring was aristocracy. They didn't bring an established elite to run everything. What they brought instead was ideas of freedom and equality. And so there was this new world, and a bunch of people got to take it over. And they had, because, you know, the first settlements are about 150 years before the Declaration of Independence. And that 150 years was a time of great learning. One of the most remarkable things that was learned was that most of the early settlers came because of religious persecution. And they thought the solution to that was to set up communities where their religion was installed by law and protected, and everybody had to practice it. And they thought, it's a big old country. If somebody doesn't like it, they can go somewhere else. So religious conformity was more or less the rule. Early on, though, the idea came to be, we don't really have to fight about that. Because first of all, we do fight a lot about it. They used to, in Massachusetts Bay Colony, they used to hang Quakers for coming to town to try to convert people to Quakerism. And Quakers are Christians, you know, different brand. And so they thought that through, and in the course of that 150 years, they adopted the idea of civil and religious freedom. And that's in the Declaration of Independence, right? Because life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that has to do, including with our duty to God. And so that religion should be respected, but also free, that reaches its perfection in the Declaration of Independence. God, I should say, occurs 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. And it's an interesting thing because it demonstrates the way they talk of him, how important God is. And it demonstrates also how important limited government is, because God appears first as the maker of the laws of nature, and nature's God, the legislator. Then he appears as the supreme judge of the world, the judge. And then he appears as divine providence, the executive branch. And then he appears up higher up as the creator, the founder of all things, right? And the lesson of the Declaration of Independence is, 1, God is a standard, greatly to be respected and worshipped and understood. But 2, you wouldn't combine all those powers in the hand of any being except God, not for men. So you see, this tremendous opportunity, which I can't see myself how it would ever be repeated in history, because there isn't a new world anymore, maybe space. But there's nowhere to go like that anymore. And so they went there, and they got 150 years to work on it, and then they proclaimed a regime defined by these two documents. That's one of the most important events in human history, in my opinion. I'll say a thing or two about the Constitution, because that's important. First of all, I mentioned that it's divided into groups, and there are 7 articles in the Constitution of the United States. And the first 3 set up the 3 branches of government. But then a second thing about it's interesting, and that is that it's not an unlimited government. There's something called the police power, which comes from English common law, very old. And it's the general authority to legislate for the health, safety, and welfare of the people. State governments in America have that. And that means that if a state government tries to do something, there are provisions in state constitutions and in the federal constitution that forbid them to do many things. But the presumption is they have the power to do it, if it fits within that common law definition, which is very wide. Whereas the Constitution of the United States delegates certain powers to the federal government. And just think what a different thing in kind that is. Like, Hillsdale College has articles of incorporation, and they're very beautiful, by the way, and we follow them here closely. But when it comes to the operation of the colleges, it basically grants us, the board and me and the staff here, power to do anything a college needs to do. Well, the federal government's not like that. The federal government has Article 1, Section 8, and that's a limit on the government, you see. The clauses it's not hard to state what they're about, is about national defense, the big job of the federal government. The second biggest group is provisions to guarantee a system of national commerce all over the nation, one nation as regards economics. Contracts are to be respected. Bankruptcies, there's to be a provision for them so that you have to be a legal process before you can get out of your debts, but there should be such a process. Money, weights and measures. It's going to be a great nation, trading freely inside its borders, and that will make the nation strong, and nations need to be strong in order to defend themselves. And the only other things that are powers given to the federal government are basically to operate in the states on the ground where the federal government has installations. So the post office is federal territory. And the federal building, there are way too many of those now, but there's a provision for them right from the beginning. So it's a limited government, and whatever it does, it has to justify by a specific provision in the Constitution that permits it. And that's not the strictest rule in the world. There's leeway. But it's a different kind of thing than to begin on the basis you can do whatever you please. The last thing I'll say about the Constitution is, what's it trying to do?
What I want to go over now is matriarchy in essence. Let's get the proper understanding of what matriarchy is really all about. And let's also realize how matriarchy and patriarchy, they are inseparable expressions. The perfect symbol of matriarchy and patriarchy as an archetype is the crab. There's no more perfect symbol or expression of the relationship between matriarchy and patriarchy than the crab, a crustacean, which includes, of course, a lobster, a hermit crab, whatever the case, a turtle, it's the same expression. But what I'm getting at is that the core is where the life is at. That's where the vitality is, the sensitive parts, that which must be protected, defended, that which must stand apart with a barrier, boundaries, or threshold against the elements, against that which is harmful, that which presents danger, a threat to life or preservation, order. Understand? When, for example, in biblical texts, there's the expression of Eve being taken from the rib of Adam. And a rib, as you know, the rib cage, it has a function. And the function of that rib is to protect its most vital organs, the most sensitive, vital parts of the physical body and its systems. It's a layered correlationship.
We like to say today, if we're conservative-minded people, which I happen to be, that the Constitution is to limit the government. But of course, that's obviously not true. The first thing it does is empower the government. And it's all over the Constitution and the documents surrounding it that everybody understood they need a strong government. In fact, the Constitution itself, which replaced the Articles of Confederation, was written in part because the Articles were failing. And the reason they were failing was the government wasn't strong enough to protect our rights. There were foreign troops on our soil, and we couldn't do anything about it. Couldn't pay our debts. There were riots in the states, and they couldn't be put down. Madison writes all this up in a really great essay before the Constitutional Convention called Vices of the Political System of the United States. It's in our Constitution reader. And so they need a stronger government, but they divide it. Now, what is the purpose of the division? And you have to think about how profound the division is, although it's been much overcome by the growth of the administrative state and the bureaucracy, which you're going to hear a lot about in this course. It's still true that it's a tremendous achievement, because in dividing the powers, they arranged for different methods of election of the different parts. So the president serves for 4 years. The House of Representatives serves for 2. The Senate serves for 6. The judges are appointed by the president on advice of the Senate. The constituencies are different. The constituency for a senator is a state. The constituency for the president is an electoral college made up of which you win by majority, that's under pressure these days, which you win by majority of the electors in the states, and the electors are calculated according to the number of senators and representatives each state has. So you see what it does? It spreads authority across space. And you remember, this is the greatest and most extensive republic in human history. And they were trying to unite a continent, the full size of which they did not quite know yet, although George Washington did name his army the Continental Army. So they want it spread, and so the Senate spreads political authority, and that means people who live in the very different and widely separated parts of the country all get a say, even if they're not very numerous. And then, on the other hand, it spreads authority across time. Because if you want to change something in the American government, the fastest you can possibly turn the whole government over is 6 years, because it takes 3 elections to elect a whole Senate, and the president 2/3 of that amount of time. So that means that it places a premium on opinions that we hold firmly and for a long time. And Madison makes this point beautifully in the Federalist Papers, and more than once. In the 49th, I think it is, he says, it is our reason alone that must be placed in control of the government. Our passions must be controlled by it. So we're supposed to think before we act. Here's another feature of the Constitution. In the 63rd Federalist, Madison says that this is the first purely representative government in history. He's claiming a uniqueness. And what does he mean by purely representative? He means that the sovereign in England was the king, and he was the executive branch. The sovereign in Athens was the free citizens, and they were the legislative branch. The sovereign in America is the constitutional majority, but they don't occupy a branch of government. We don't control, they've introduced the referendum, things like that in later years, but there's no federal referendum process. Why? Madison thought it would be good for us because, just like you can't trust the government fully because they're people, you can't trust us fully either because we're people too. And so we can only act through elections. That makes elections important in America. And it also means we can't do anything by the spur of the moment. The best decision's not being made on the spur of the moment. And I'll state a telling exception to that, too. The president is specifically empowered to act alone. And that's in matters of execution. Think of the different meanings of that term, execution. When you've got a war, you have to act suddenly. But laws prevail because, of course, if the president starts a war and the Congress doesn't like it, or if he sends a bunch of troops somewhere, they don't have to supply any money for that. And the money will run out if they will put a stop to it. And they have, often in American history, and threatened other times. So you see, the idea is that we have all the power, but we can't act except through our representatives. And that adds patience and deliberation to the process. And then a last thing, the size of the United States, the fact that it's spread so far, the fact that it includes so many people in so many jurisdictions. The states are supposed to have a lot more authority than they have these days, and one of my wishes is to see it restored. A lot of other things like that too. But when it's spread all over the place, let's say you've got 10 little conspiratorial friends. If you got 10 little conspiratorial friends, you can meet in dark rooms and whisper to each other, and nobody need find out. But what's 10 going to do in a country this size? In fact, to influence the country, you have to talk across millions of people, hundreds of thousands in the founding, millions now, tens of millions now, and you have to speak across vast spaces. And Madison writes, that will teach us to be more candid with each other. We love to say that all politicians are liars, and I think that's not quite true, but it's a rough truth. But on the other hand, think how much worse it would be if they didn't have to talk in front of us, and if they weren't free to contradict each other. And I want to close with this point because it's fundamentally important. There are just two ways of governing human beings. And one is by talking and the other is by force. Because we are the speaking beings. This rationality that we have that lets us use common nouns, that's what makes us political. And so legitimate political systems are always built on talking, not on violence. They may take violence to install. They may require violence to persist and to defend, but they must not proceed in their ordinary workings by violence of one citizen upon another. And so we have a political system that, first of all, is meant to protect our rights, which are written in our nature, the decisive part of which is our ability to reason and talk.
And when we get into the gender wars, patriarchy, matriarchy, so on and so forth, we're missing the whole point. We're missing the whole point. Cancer is an emphasis for us really reflecting on these things concerning matriarchy, and that I want us to get to the point where we know or remember that matriarchy is what informs patriarchy. We don't know how to construct patriarchy, the infrastructure of it, its protective order and systems, the infrastructure that preserves that which is most valuable and vital to us. We don't know how to form it or construct it without the input, the feedback, the understanding of, investigation of, comprehension of, competence of the matriarchal value or principle and even archetype. That's what lets us know where to place the gate, the bar, the rail. It lets us know where to place the angels with swords as protection. Where do we know where to put everything of infrastructure in order? It comes from the matriarchal expression of matriarchal law. Matriarchal law will never, ever, ever contradict Cancer and the moon. This is what we need to understand first. Every female whose duty is to evolve to the status and jurisdiction of a woman, her primary obligation is to exemplify Cancer and the moon, not to get arrested in development at the expression of Venus, not to get arrested in the development of Venus. She is to evolve to understand and to mirror and to express consistently in all that she does Cancer and the moon, because she is the matriarch personified. Men also have this same commitment, because matriarchy is a principle that transcends genders. It is not specific to the woman. It is just that the woman's biochemical design has an underlying intention to exemplify the matriarchal value in life. That is who she is, no matter what she does, no matter where she goes. That is the essence of her being. Every woman is a female, but every female is not a woman. Understand? The first levels, the lower levels, that is Venus. That is the adolescence of the feminine principle. The heights of the feminine principle is Cancer and Scorpio. Let's get it understood. So, the first thing that's being clarified is identity. And from identity, community is reestablished on matriarchal principle. That is what we are learning. That is where we are headed. And that's exactly what's taken place between the download through the North Node, Aries, which we just accomplished, and the solar lunar eclipse phases in Aries. Wow, now I'm looking at an owl. Every time. Now an owl literally just came here and just looked dead at, yo, this is wild, B. Yesterday a bird landed on my shoulder, now an owl came here looking at me. Okay, anyway. So, yummy aj. Oh, yummy aj. Okay, so, man, where was I? It's amazing.
But also we have a nation where we're supposed to discuss things and teach each other and learn from each other. And I'll go back to the European Union. The Poles and the Czechs and the English and the French don't really have a good way to talk to each other except through the agencies of the European Union. And that means it's very difficult for there to be a culture in which public opinion is formed freely among all of the people who are affected. They can't speak with each other routinely. There are translation programs, and lots of people speak more than one language in Europe, and yet to talk in your native tongue, the tongue in which you've been educated and by which you articulate your best thoughts, that's what you do, especially with fellow citizens. It's become a very great country in the course of its history. Beyond the imaginings, even, of the people who founded it, who were extremely ambitious people. They had the highest possible hopes, right? Well, if that's true, there must have been some cause of it. But also, it's in that final purpose we serve that we have adopted. It's a purpose available to all human beings. We have adopted it for our own. And then finally, in this form of government we have under the Constitution, which is itself a reflection of human nature, and that is why it has worked so well. So I'll close with the editorial point, well known. I think we ought to restore the authority of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Thank you.
Okay, so we start from the top. Aries North Node has been accomplished, which is to initiate the reformation of the natural identity of the natural person, the divine self, who stands in the image and likeness of God, Allah, Olodumare, however you want to call the Most High, the one with inalienable rights, which is not a citizen or fictitious character, nor incorporated, created entity. No, the true living being, man and woman. Okay? It's the restoration of that. Specifically, on an individual basis, it is the claim, the acceptance, and the assertion of our identity as we comprehend our purpose, our destiny, what we were called to serve with, understanding that the suffering behind us was an investment into the wisdom and authority that we will have to accomplish that with. This is stepping into the divine authority, the divine identity, claiming the proper status of the spirit man and the spirit woman, clothed in flesh, realizing ourselves outside of the fictitious character, the Capricorn theory, the Rothschild Rockefeller ideal, the Ahrimanic impulse. Understand? So Aries is a point of emphasis for the reformation of identity. This is why we have Neptune that's providing the vision, the visual concept from the higher consciousness, the ideal from the heart, and the mission, the soul's vibration. And Saturn, in that conjunction with Neptune, held a strong concentration in us grounding that heavenly vision with realistic strategies, measures, intentions that gives it form, as Neptune is formless. Neptune is an essence of expression. It is not form. Saturn is the opposite form. Understand? So with that being said, what happens when we return to this claim of proper status in spirit, we realize our obligation and need to do so also as a civic person, as a civic being, man and woman, to make the same claim. Understand? And this is why I have been emphasizing that we do have a responsibility to clarify our identity outside of the straw man illusions. It's going to become very important as Saturn transits through Aries. Whenever Saturn transits through a constellation, sign, or zodiac, or house, essentially it's taking 2.5 years to give you authority in that jurisdiction, to give you authority in that dominion, to give you authority in that spiritual algorithm of consciousness. That authority is through karma, knowing where your obedience must be, knowing where self-control, accountability, discipline, infrastructure, all of the patriarchal law that must go around the matriarchal realization, the inner self. Do we understand? It is the earth containment around water. Matriarchy is water. Patriarchy is earth. Understand? So, where this is supposed to lead at, and mind you, in the timeline, Saturn is retrograde. So we still have 2.5 years for Saturn to transit Aries. We're getting prepared for the actual work of forming the true, natural, and authentic identity consistent with the soul's mission, the heart, soul, urge expression, the life path, the first house, the 10th house character, the first house image. It would take 2.5 years to form that image. However, form of patriarchy, okay, because it's patriarchal form that we have to give to the image, which is laws, rules, order, accountability, discipline, principles that we must show obedience and compliance to if we are to be successful, if we are to have access, if we are to be sincere about our claim, if we're to stand in proper jurisdiction, if we are to have authority to move power, because only authority moves power righteously. When power is utilized without authority, it is criminal. Understand? Let's clarify this. So, in order to form through patriarchal expression, which is Saturn, It has to be informed by matriarchal expression, which is the moon in Cancer. The matriarchal expression is being expanded so that what must be formed is clarified. The matriarchal internal expression of the self, fourth house, the inner child, the intuitive knowing, the connection to Mother Earth's values, laws, and principles of self-preservation, love, compassion, empathy, care, advocacy, security, vulnerability. Motherhood, family, community, social security, welfare. All of this is the matriarchal impulse, which is primary. That's first. That is the impulse that informs us of what patriarchal expression must look like. It is the strength of the son that serves the vulnerability of the mother. It is the strength of men that serves the vulnerability of women. It is the strength of the husband that preserves the vulnerabilities of the wife. That is the order. So when we consider Saturn transiting Aries, that is a patriarchal act of law that we are actualizing into existence, realizing codes, laws, order of the self that has to be formed if we are to be sincere and true to our claim of who and what we are. But we don't know what that's going to look like if we are not in touch with the matriarchal law. The matriarchal law is where you are connected to the feminine principle of the self. Where is my care? Where are my needs? Where do I realize love? Where do I realize mutual support? Where do I realize security? Where do I establish self-care? Where do I practice self-care? How is this supposed to look? What is marriage supposed to look like? What is my family supposed to look like? What is my place in community, in society, where I am part of welfare and social service? Where I am contributing to welfare and social service? That is the matriarchal law that we first must obey. There's one way to show obedience to matriarchal law, and that is through patriarchal expression and commitment. Do we understand that? Otherwise, it's just lip service. It's just talk. Matriarchal law, it must manifest through patriarchal establishment and commitment and obedience and compliance. A man who has women to care for, a wife, mother, daughters, children too, which is included in Cancer, elders included in Cancer, anyone who is vulnerable. A man who has someone vulnerable to look after, to care for. He perfects his expression of civilization through that commitment. Because his patriarchal expression is directly informed by his matriarchal obedience. Do you see how that works? We are showing obedience first to the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother who guides us to love, compassion, care, self-preservation, togetherness, unity, welfare, social security, advocacy, protection, nurturing. Without matriarchal law, we do not have a beginning to establish civilization. It is the source of civilization. You want to civilize a wild, bloodthirsty man? Give him daughters. The moment he has daughters, all of that is over. His heart immediately changes. A married man in his right mind, he matures into a civilized man, putting away his barbaric practices. Because that's the influence of a woman. Don't drink from the milk carton. Take your feet off the couch. Take your shoes off before you enter. You need to take another shower. Honey, that's not nice. Don't be mean. It's the little things we overlook that women have power and dominion over in our world that preserves civilization itself. And that's the danger of feminism. When you allow feminism to contaminate your mind, your children's minds, when you enable it participate in spreading that evil, that wicked regime, it alienates females from their divine center of matriarchal insight, of matriarchal intuition. It ruins and spoils their power as oracles, because an oracle must always be trustworthy. The oracle must always point at the moral commitment, the value of virtue. What is the right thing? The intention of oracle is care. Feminism spoils that root, that basis in the expression of the female. And it makes of her an Ahrimanic impulse, an Ahrimanic spirit, a Capricorn, Machiavellian, lifeless, dry breast. She's no good to herself or anyone else in her life. She will still have her looks. She will still be physically desirable, but she's a dead corpse. She's a dead corpse. Feminism goes directly against this order that I am explaining and expressing. And what it does is it further supports and sustains the exploitation of patriarchy. The abuse of patriarchy is what it does. Where while she thinks that she's taking the patriarchy down, she's enabling it. She's accelerating it. She's supporting it. She's enabling it. she's making it that much more impenetrable because she is void of self-realization as the woman, the feminine principle, the oracle, the moon's light that reflects the light of the sun. Understand. What this point evolves to is the Declaration of Independence, 1776, July 4th, which really was July 2nd, okay? July 4th has to do with the alignment with Sirius, okay? That's different. However, it goes in a record as July 4th, 1776, Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, it represents clarification of the identity apart from a patriarchal constriction of the natural and inalienable rights of the natural self, and we've come full circle. So I'm going to use that as a basis of example that we could refer to clarify what we are processing through in cycles. What the Declaration of Independence did, it was the forerunner of the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence was clarification of identity, autonomy, the needs for inalienable rights, the realization of the self as in a divine expression in the image of God. Although, the white men of that time, they had many contradictions in what they said they believed in, okay? But I'm not going to make this about that. We all know what colonism was about. Okay, but let's just stick to, the principle here. That part goes with Aries. The Declaration of Independence, okay? I want you to consider that with everything that's going on with Aries right now concerning our identity, the first house, Aries Neptune, Aries Saturn, and Aries direct motion later on for 2.5 years through Aries. It's about the solidification of your personal Declaration of Independence over your life. The same way that it took place for this United States corporation, setting itself apart from England. It's the same with you and me, setting ourselves apart from the Rothschild, Rockefeller, Capricorn, Ahrimanic, number 8 shadow, Machiavellian corporate theory, the legal entity, the fictitious character, incorporated being, trained through these corporate General Education Board, established 1902 by Rothschild Rockefeller to train us into well-oiled machines for the Capricorn theory. We became it instead of expressing our natural civilization that we were to, according to our inalienable rights and the purpose that we came here to express. Rockefeller was very specific in his intention to not desire thinkers or creative persons because, as he quoted it, he has that in abundance in this country. He wants neck down a machine operator, a factory worker, someone who takes orders, who goes to college to learn how to move their corporations, not to become enlightened. Okay? So the wave of feminism that had a lot of liberal females out here, pushing their accolades. I got this degree, I got that degree. The truth is, you're not educated unless you educated yourself. You're well trained. There's a difference between educated and well trained. Let's make sure we understand that, because that was never the intention of Rockefeller in making colleges locally accessible through hefty bank loans and debt to enlighten you. No, it's not. It's to train you, not enlighten you. Enlightenment is a responsibility that you must take upon yourself. That's the last thing they're going to do. Secret societies give enlightenment. Secret societies. However, their intentions with that enlightenment is a whole different story, especially through the Spanish Inquisition. Understand that. We talked about that too. So, Declaration of Independence, this goes more with the Aries transit of what we're dealing with aligning the identity apart from these illusions in life, these dark end stories about this world, this life, dirty government, dirty corporation, and the roles that we play and how it constricts us from a sense of fulfillment in life. And to give you a heads up, fulfillment is coming in the water trine or trine, tomato, tomato, that's coming up, Cancer, Jupiter entering into the second decan of Cancer, as well as Vesta entering into the second decan Scorpio. And then you have the North Node enter into the second decan Pisces. This grand trine is about fulfillment. Fulfillment through the water, which is emotional fulfillment and revolution in the life. Finally having a pour in of exactly what your divine self needs to flourish, to have vitality, and to feel well fed. Understand? I will go into that discourse separately from this content. So, the Aries expression going with the Declaration of Independence, however, it informed the Constitution. Part of what informed the Constitution is in the natural self, it's impossible to separate the natural self from the realization of the natural needs. Because that's the motivation that had the settlers and you and me to see a need to set ourselves apart and pull ourselves out of codependent situations. Codependent situations where our identity is restricted, our expression is restricted, where the truth of our story, our legacy, our purpose, our destiny is restricted. What causes us to realize that is the emotional turmoil of that Cancer Mars retrograde 7 to 9 month transit that we endured in realizing, okay, there's something I'm not getting here and I have an obligation to make sure that I get it. There's something that started way back in childhood that I'm projecting onto other people. I'm suffering here and I need to get down to the bottom of what my needs are. As they say, who hurt you? Then we have the Juno retrograde in Scorpio, which was a walk through the wilderness, facing the shadows of the self that were suppressed because we could not have what the natural person needs. We could not source the nurturing, the security, the advocacy that the natural person needed. And now direct motion Juno allows us to see the other side of that, especially as the water trine is activated with all planets stepping into, well, with the 3 different planets that I mentioned, stepping into the second decan of the Scorpio triplicity. Understand? Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. It's going to expand this awareness, as well as Jupiter in Cancer. It's expanding the awareness through the waters. That's what informs what type of infrastructure we need. What rules do we need? What boundaries do we need? What does this also remind you of? Coming out of the wilderness, what are the two things that we need as we head to freedom? I'll say this over and over again. Accountability and moral commitment. Accountability and moral commitment. The moral commitment goes to the matriarchal law. Self-care, self-preservation, self-advocacy, self-respect. Understand? And the accountability. I'm responsible for having boundaries that protects me, that preserves me. I'm responsible for advocating for the self. I'm responsible for creating infrastructure that preserves and moves me forward. That's what the Mars and Virgo transit is about. It's the AED that's resetting our pace, our sense of urgency about initiating the patriarchal infrastructure that has to safeguard the matriarchal realization within the self, the emotional needs, the status of vulnerability in the self that we are responsible for, not somebody else. You're responsible for your happiness. You're responsible for your emotional security. You're responsible for your self-esteem. You're responsible for all of that. When you betray your intuition, the voice of your inner child, putting yourself in situations and circumstances that are regrettable, you don't get to complain and point fingers and say, oh, so-and-so did this and so-and-so. No, you have yourself to blame because your intuition told you to turn around. Your inner child told you that he or she was uncomfortable with what you're doing and how you're living, but you didn't show obedience. See, matriarchy is not what feminism taught you. It's not what pretty girls on the internet explained to you. They misled you. They lied to you. They tricked you. And I'm sorry to bear the bad news. You should stop listening to females on the internet. Start that today. The prettier they are, the more lost they are. And the infamous astrologist stands on that. Understand? I don't care who don't like it. I'm saying it. We are the ones who hurt ourselves. We are the ones who created regrettable circumstances for ourselves. We are the ones who violated ourselves. So on the way out of the wilderness, we realize accountability must go with freedom. If we are to express freedom, there must be accountability. Therefore, there must be law to show obedience to within the life. Because a crab has to have a hard shell because of how sensitive it is within the self. If you are that sensitive within the self, you need a hard shell. That's like a woman who puts on revealing clothing. She goes outside and then she gets harassed and, oh, men shouldn't do this and men shouldn't do that. No, you should respect and love yourself enough to protect yourself and cover. You cannot control the behavior and impulses through the lines of nature in man in society. You got your titties out, you got your ass out and everything else, and you want to put the blame on other people for you being gawked at or talked to a certain way or dealt with a certain... No, that's your fault. That's your fault. You know you got a big old ass. You know you got big old titties. You know you're curvy. It's the flesh of the crab that's sensitive. And you're responsible for keeping a shell around that which is vulnerable, sensitive, or valuable. Anything valuable we cover. Anything valuable we protect. You step outside showing everything. Yeah, you obviously don't value yourself. And justifying it through what other people do, no, that ain't gonna cut it. So the same way that our realization of our needs informs the Constitution, the realization of our needs for inalienable rights to be honored, respected, and held in proper status, it requires rules, it requires laws, it requires boundaries, obligations, in order to preserve the matriarchal realization in the self. And that is where the Constitution came from. The Constitution was informed by the matriarchal sensitivities and the identity of the natural man and woman.